The supermarket was busy that evening. People moved slowly through the checkout lines, carts filled with groceries for the week ahead. The soft beeping of scanners echoed across the store as cashiers worked through the long queues. Near the back of one line stood Steven Seagal. Dressed simply in a black jacket and dark sunglasses, he looked like any other quiet customer waiting his turn. No security, no assistance, no attention. Most people around him had no idea who he was. In front of him stood a young woman with her little daughter. The girl couldn't have been more than 6 years old. She held a small box of cereal tightly in her hands, looking up at her mother with hopeful eyes. "Mom, can we keep this one?" the child asked softly. The mother hesitated. She glanced at the checkout screen as the cashier scanned the items. The total kept climbing. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter as if she was doing the math in her head again and again. Then quietly, she reached into the bag and began removing items. First the fruit, then the bread, then a carton of milk. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the cashier. "I'll have to leave these." The little girl watched silently, still holding the cereal box. For a moment, the line behind them grew quiet. Some people looked away politely. Others pretended not to notice. But Steven noticed everything. He had seen the hesitation in the mother's voice, the embarrassment in her eyes, the way the child tried not to ask for anything else. The girl slowly placed the cereal back on the counter. "It's okay, Mom," she said quietly. "We don't need it." That was the moment Steven stepped forward. Without saying much, he reached into his wallet and gently placed his credit card on the counter beside the groceries. The cashier looked confused. The mother turned in surprise. Steven spoke calmly, his voice steady and simple. "Please put everything back in the bag." The mother shook her head immediately. "No, sir. I can't accept that." Steven gave a small, reassuring smile. Then he said something no one in the store expected. "Take the card," he told her gently. "Use it for the next 24 hours." For a moment, the entire checkout line went silent. The mother stared at the card in disbelief, because what he had just offered wasn't just help for groceries. It was something far bigger. And no one, not even Steven, could have predicted what she would choose to do with that trust. For a few seconds, the checkout line felt completely still. The young mother stared at the credit card resting on the counter as if it might disappear at any moment. Her daughter looked between her and the card with wide, curious eyes, not fully understanding what was happening. "Sir, I really can't take this," the mother said softly, shaking her head. Her voice carried a mix of gratitude and hesitation. Accepting help from a stranger, especially something this generous, felt overwhelming. Behind them, a few people in line exchanged quiet glances. Some had started to recognize the calm man standing there, but Steven Seagal didn't seem interested in attention. He simply leaned slightly against the counter, calm and patient, as if this was the most ordinary moment in the world. "It's all right," he said gently. "Just take care of your daughter today." That was all. No speech, no explanation, no expectation. The cashier looked at the mother, waiting for her decision. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked up the card. "Are you sure?" she asked again, almost whispering. Steven nodded once. 24 hours, he said calmly. "Use it however you need." The little girl tugged lightly on her mother's sleeve. "Mom, does that mean we can keep the cereal?" she asked, quietly. For the first time since reaching the counter, the mother smiled. A small, emotional smile that revealed just how much pressure she had been carrying. "Yes," she said softly, "we can keep the cereal." The cashier finished scanning the groceries and placed them into the bag. The receipt printed slowly, the sound of the machine filling the silence that had settled over the line. A few people behind them began whispering. "Quietly, is that really him?" someone murmured. Another customer pulled out their phone for a moment, trying to look again at the man in the black jacket. But Steven didn't wait around. As soon as the transaction finished, he gave the mother a polite nod. "No need to rush," he told her. "Just make today a little easier." Then he turned and walked calmly toward the exit of the supermarket. The automatic doors opened with a soft, mechanical sound as he stepped outside. Inside the store, the mother stood there for a moment, still holding the card. Her daughter hugged the grocery bag like it contained something precious. "Mom, was that a superhero?" the little girl asked. The mother laughed softly, still trying to process what had just happened. "I don't know," she replied, "but he was very kind." A few minutes later, they stepped out of the store and walked to their small car parked near the far end of the lot. The sun was beginning to set, casting long orange reflections across the windshields. Once inside the car, the mother placed the grocery bags on the passenger seat. Then she looked down at the credit card again. The name printed on it was clear: Steven Seagal. Her heart raced slightly. For the next 24 hours, she had access to something she hadn't experienced in a long time: freedom to choose. She could buy groceries for the week, clothes for her daughter, maybe even something small for herself. Her daughter leaned forward from the back seat. "Mom, what are we going to buy now?" she asked with excitement. The mother looked out the windshield for a moment, thinking carefully, because although the card gave her possibilities, what she decided to do next would surprise even the man who trusted her with it. Instead of driving toward the busy shopping district, she started the engine and turned the car in the opposite direction, and the first place she chose to go would later leave Steven completely speechless. The car rolled slowly out of the supermarket parking lot. Streetlights were beginning to glow as evening settled over the quiet neighborhood streets. Inside the small car, the little girl sat happily in the back seat, holding the cereal box like it was a treasure. Her mother kept both hands on the steering wheel, but her thoughts were racing. The credit card sat carefully on the dashboard. For the next 24 hours, she had been given something she hadn't experienced in a long time: options. Real options. She could stop by the clothing store her daughter always looked at through the window. She could buy warm jackets for the coming winter. She could finally replace the broken kitchen appliances she had been struggling with for months. The possibilities felt endless. "Mom, where are we going?" the little girl asked excitedly. Her mother glanced at her through the rearview mirror and smiled gently. "You'll see," she said. They drove past several busy shopping centers. Bright lights from store signs reflected across the windshield. The little girl pressed her face lightly against the window. "Ooh, toys," she whispered as they passed a colorful toy shop. But the car didn't stop. They continued driving. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Soon the busy streets turned into quieter roads lined with older buildings and small community spaces. Finally, the mother slowed the car and pulled into a modest parking lot beside a small brick building. The sign outside read, "Community Food Bank and Family Support Center." The little girl tilted her head in confusion. "Mom, this isn't a store," she said. Her mother turned off the engine and sat quietly for a moment. The credit card was still resting on the dashboard. She picked it up slowly, turning it over in her hand. "That man trusted us," she said softly. Her daughter watched carefully. "What does that mean?" the girl asked. The mother took a deep breath. "It means someone believed we would do the right thing." She stepped out of the car and opened the back door for her daughter. Inside the building, a few volunteers were organizing boxes of food for families who were struggling. The room wasn't fancy, just folding tables, shelves of canned goods, and a handful of tired but friendly volunteers working together. When the mother walked in, one of the volunteers looked up with a warm smile. "Hello," the woman said. "Can we help you?" The young mother hesitated for a moment. Then she stepped forward. "I'd like to buy groceries," she said quietly. The volunteer nodded politely. "For your family?" The mother shook her head gently. "For everyone who needs them tonight." The volunteer looked surprised, and so did the small group of people waiting nearby. The little girl tugged her mother's hand. "Mom, "Are we giving them food?" she asked. Her mother smiled softly. "Yes," she said. With the help of the volunteers, she began selecting large boxes of groceries: rice, canned vegetables, pasta, milk, fresh fruit. Soon the tables were filling with supplies that would help dozens of families. The volunteers exchanged quiet looks of amazement as the total kept growing. The little girl helped place small items into boxes, feeling proud of the work she was doing. Outside, night had fully arrived. Inside the small community center, something unexpected was happening. A single act of kindness from a stranger had just turned into something much bigger. But what the mother didn't know was this. Later that evening, Steven Seagal would receive a notification from his bank, and when he saw where the card had been used, he would sit in silence for several seconds, because this was not at all what he had expected. Later that evening, the city had grown quiet. Street lights glowed along the sidewalks, and most shops had already closed for the night. Inside, a modest hotel room across town, Steven Seagal sat near the window, looking out over the calm streets below. It had been a long day, and the moment at the supermarket had already faded into the background of his thoughts. To him, it had simply been a small act of kindness, nothing more. He believed that when you had the ability to help someone, you didn't need a reason. You just helped. On the small table beside him rested his phone. Suddenly, the screen lit up with a notification from his bank. A transaction alert. Steven picked up the phone and glanced at the message. The credit card had been used. He expected that. After all, he had told the young mother she could use it for 24 hours. But when he opened the transaction details, he paused. The location surprised him. It wasn't a clothing store. It wasn't a toy shop. And it certainly wasn't a luxury restaurant. Instead, the payment had been made at a small place called Community Food Bank and Family Support Center. Steven leaned back slightly in his chair. For a moment, he simply stared at the screen. He imagined the young mother walking into a grocery store, buying food for herself and her daughter, maybe even picking out something special for the little girl. That would have made perfect sense. But this was something different, curious. He opened the full receipt that had been emailed to him. The list of items slowly filled the screen. Large bags of rice, boxes of pasta, canned vegetables, milk, fresh fruit, bread, dozens of basic food supplies. Far more than one family could ever need for a single day. Steven sat silently as he scrolled through the receipt. Each item told the same story. The young mother hadn't used the card for luxury or comfort. She had used it to help others. Somewhere in the city, families who were struggling would now receive food because of a decision she made. And suddenly, the quiet kindness he had offered at the supermarket had grown into something much larger than he ever expected. Across town, inside the small community center, volunteers were still busy organizing the food boxes. The young mother stood beside them, helping stack supplies onto the tables. Her daughter moved between the volunteers, proudly carrying small items and placing them into the boxes. Every now and then, the girl would look up and smile. To her, it felt like they were part of something important. One of the volunteers approached the mother. "Are you sure about all of this?" the woman asked gently. "It's a lot." The mother nodded. "A man helped us today," she explained quietly. "I think this is the best way to use it." The volunteer looked around the room at the growing stacks of food. Families would be arriving in the morning to receive assistance. Because of this unexpected donation, there would now be enough supplies for many more people. "You're going to make a lot of families very happy tomorrow," the volunteer said, warmly. The mother smiled softly but shook her head. "It wasn't just me," she replied. "A stranger trusted me to do something good." Back in his hotel room, Steven placed the phone down on the table. He looked out the window again, thinking about what had happened. In all his years, he had seen many different kinds of people. Some who chased fame, some who chased money, some who looked for recognition. But what that young mother had done tonight required something far rarer. She had been given an opportunity to make her own life easier. Instead, she had chosen to make life easier for others. Steven exhaled slowly and leaned back in his chair. A small smile appeared on his face, because sometimes the most powerful moments in life come quietly, not through grand speeches, not through dramatic events, but through simple choices that reveal a person's true character. And tomorrow morning, Steven had already decided something. He was going to visit that small community center, not to be recognized, not to be thanked, but to see something for himself, the kindness that had grown from a single moment in a supermarket line. The next morning, the city woke slowly. Early sunlight spread across the streets, and the quiet neighborhoods began filling with the familiar sounds of daily life. Cars passing by, shop doors opening, and people starting their routines. Across town, the small community food bank and family support center was already busy. Volunteers moved between tables, organizing the food supplies that had been purchased the night before. Boxes of rice, canned vegetables, bread, and fresh fruit were neatly stacked across the room. The unexpected donation had changed everything. Normally, the center could only prepare a limited number of food boxes each week, but today was different. Today, there was enough food to help many more families. Inside the building, the young mother had arrived early with her daughter. She was helping the volunteers pack the groceries into organized boxes. Her daughter sat at a small table nearby, proudly placing apples and small snack items into bags. To the little girl, it felt like a big adventure. "Mom," she said excitedly, "look how many boxes we made." Her mother smiled warmly. "You're doing an important job," she replied. Around them, other volunteers worked quietly but happily. Everyone could feel that something special had happened, not because of the amount of money spent, but because of the spirit behind it. Meanwhile, outside the building, a black car pulled slowly into the parking lot. The driver stepped out calmly. It was Steven Seagal. He wore the same simple black jacket and sunglasses from the day before, blending in easily with the quiet morning surroundings. He paused for a moment outside the entrance, looking at the small sign on the building. Then he walked inside. The moment he entered, he could see the room filled with activity. Volunteers moving between tables, families beginning to arrive, children holding their parents' hands as they waited patiently for their turn. And near the center of the room, he saw the young mother again. She was lifting one of the boxes onto a table, helping prepare it for the next family. Her daughter stood beside her, handing small items to another volunteer. Neither of them had noticed Steven yet. He stood quietly near the doorway, observing. There was no rush in his movements, no need to interrupt the moment. He watched as the volunteers worked together, handing out food boxes to grateful families. One elderly man accepted a bag of groceries with both hands and nodded appreciatively. A young couple with a small baby thanked the volunteers before leaving with their supplies. The atmosphere in the room felt warm and genuine. This wasn't charity performed for attention. It was simply people helping people. After a few minutes, one of the volunteers finally noticed Steven standing near the door. Her eyes widened slightly as she recognized him, but before she could say anything, Steven raised his hand politely, asking her not to draw attention. He preferred to keep the focus where it belonged, on the work being done. Eventually, the young mother turned around and saw him. For a moment, she froze. Her expression quickly shifted to surprise. She walked toward him nervously. I didn't expect to see you here," she said softly. Steven smiled gently. "I was curious," he replied. She looked slightly embarrassed. "I hope you're not upset," she said. "I didn't spend the money the way most people probably would have." Steven shook his head immediately. "No," he said calmly. "You used it exactly the right way." The mother glanced around the room at the families receiving food. "I just thought, if someone trusted me with that much kindness, the best thing I could do was share it." Steven nodded slowly. "That's something many people forget," he said. The little girl ran up beside her mother. "Hi," she said cheerfully to Steven. We're helping everyone today. Stephen crouched slightly so he could speak at her level. That's a very important job, he told her. She grinned proudly. Mom said helping people is the best thing you can do. Stephen stood again and looked around the room once more. What he saw wasn't just food being distributed. He saw something much deeper. One small moment in a supermarket line had created a chain of generosity. His simple gesture had helped one family. That family had then helped dozens of others, and those people would likely remember the kindness and pass it forward in their own way someday. Stephen folded his arms thoughtfully. You know, he said quietly to the mother, most people think generosity is about how much you give. She looked at him curiously. But the truth, he continued, is that generosity is about what you choose to do when you're given the chance. The mother looked down for a moment, reflecting on his words. Around them, volunteers continued, packing boxes and greeting families. The room was filled with quiet gratitude. Stephen realized something important in that moment. The young mother hadn't just accepted help, she had transformed it. And sometimes, the people who have the least resources have the greatest understanding of what kindness truly means. But what the volunteers and families didn't know yet was this. Before Stephen left that building later that morning, he was going to make a decision that would help this small community center far beyond just one day. The morning continued inside the small community center. More families slowly arrived, each one greeted with the same warmth and respect from the volunteers. Boxes of groceries were carefully handed out, and quiet words of gratitude filled the room. Near the entrance, Steven Seagal stood watching for a moment longer. The scene in front of him was simple, yet powerful. Parents leaving with food that would help their families through the week. Volunteers smiling as they packed each box. Children laughing softly while helping where they could. And in the middle of it all stood the young mother and her daughter, still helping organize supplies as if they had been part of the center for years. The daughter proudly carried small bags from table to table. "Mom, where should this go?" she asked, holding up a bag of apples. "Over there with the fruit boxes," her mother replied. Stephen noticed the way the volunteers treated them, not as strangers, but as part of the team. It was clear that the kindness from the previous night had already become something shared by everyone in the room. After a few minutes, the center manager approached Stephen quietly. She had recognized him earlier but waited for a calm moment before speaking. "Thank you for coming," she said warmly. Stephen nodded politely. "You run an important place." "Here," he replied. The manager smiled modestly. "We try," she said. "But honestly, we're often struggling to keep enough supplies for everyone who needs help." Stephen glanced toward the tables where volunteers were still packing. The last few food boxes. "How many families do you usually help each week?" he asked. The manager thought for a moment. "On a good week, maybe 30, she explained. "Sometimes a little more, but there are many more who need assistance than we can support." Stephen looked around the room again. The building wasn't large. The shelves were simple. Volunteers worked hard, but resources were limited. And yet, despite those limitations, the atmosphere inside felt hopeful. He folded his arms thoughtfully. Nearby, the young mother was helping an elderly woman carry a food box to the door. Her daughter walked beside them proudly, holding a loaf of bread. When they returned, the girl spotted Stephen again. She waved happily. "Look, Mom, our friend is still here," she said. The mother walked over again, slightly shy. "We're almost finished organizing everything," she said. Stephen smiled gently. "You've both done more than enough already." She shook her head softly. "No, we just did what felt right." For a moment, the three of them stood quietly while the volunteers continued their work around them. Then Stephen turned back toward the manager. "Can we talk for a moment?" he asked. She nodded and led him to a small office near the back of the building. The room was modest, with a desk, 2 chairs, and shelves filled with paperwork and donation records. Stephen sat down calmly. "I'd like to ask you something," he said. The manager listened carefully. "What would this center need to help more families regularly?" he asked. She hesitated slightly. It was a big question. "Well," she began slowly, "consistent food supplies would help the most. If we had reliable funding for groceries each month, we could support far more families." She opened one of the folders on her desk and showed him a few numbers. "These are our current resources," she explained. "We rely on small donations and volunteers. Every week is uncertain." Steven studied the numbers quietly. The solution, from his perspective, was simple, but he didn't rush the conversation. Instead, he closed the folder gently and leaned back in his chair. "Last night," he said, "I thought I was helping one family." The manager nodded. "But that family helped many others instead," he continued. He paused for a moment. "That kind of decision deserves support." The manager looked at him with curiosity. "What do you mean?" she asked. Steven reached into his jacket and took out a small notebook. He wrote something down carefully, then slid the paper across the desk. The manager looked down. Her eyes widened. Because the number written on the page was far larger than anything the center had ever received. It wasn't just enough to restock the shelves. It was enough to support the center for months, maybe even longer. The manager looked up, speechless. I don't know what to say," she said quietly. Steven simply smiled. "You don't need to say anything," he replied. He stood up from the chair. "Just keep doing what you're already doing." As he walked back toward the main room, the volunteers were finishing the final food boxes of the morning. The young mother and her daughter were still helping clean up the tables. Neither of them knew what had just happened in that small office. And Steven had no intention of making an announcement, because for him, the most meaningful acts of generosity were always the quiet ones. Before leaving, he stopped near the door one last time. The little girl ran over again. "Are you leaving?" she asked. Steven nodded gently. "But I think this place will be doing even more good soon," he told her. She smiled, not fully understanding his words but sensing the kindness behind them. As he stepped outside into the sunlight, Steven looked back at the building one last time. All of this had started with a simple moment in a supermarket line, a small decision, a simple gesture, and a young mother who chose to turn kindness into something bigger than anyone expected. But there was still one final moment left, a moment that would reveal just how deeply her choice had affected him. The morning slowly came to an end at the small community center. Most of the families had already received their food boxes and headed home. The once busy room had grown quieter, leaving only a few volunteers finishing the last tasks of the day. Tables were being wiped down, empty boxes were stacked neatly near the wall. Sunlight streamed softly through the windows, giving the room a warm and peaceful feeling. Near one of the tables, the young mother and her daughter were helping organize the remaining supplies. The little girl carefully placed a few apples into a basket while humming quietly to herself. "Mom," she said, "that was fun. Can we help here again?" Her mother smiled gently. "I think they'd be happy to have us," she replied. Across the room, the center manager walked out of the small office. She paused for a moment, looking at the volunteers with a thoughtful expression. The paper Steven had left on her desk was still in her hand. Even now, she could hardly believe the number written on it. She looked around the room again, realizing that the future of the center had just changed in a way none of them expected. But Steven had asked for one simple thing: no announcement, no attention. Just let the work continue. The manager respected that. So instead of saying anything about the donation, she simply joined the volunteers in cleaning up. Meanwhile, outside the building, Steven Seagal stood beside his car for a moment before leaving. The quiet street looked ordinary. People passed by without realizing what had just happened inside that small community center. Steven leaned lightly against the car door, thinking. Over the years, he had been involved in many projects and causes, but moments like this were different. They weren't planned. They weren't organized events or public appearances. They were simply human moments, unexpected opportunities to see the true character of someone else. He thought back to the supermarket the day before. The nervous mother removing groceries from the counter. The little girl putting the cereal back. The quiet embarrassment in the mother's voice when she apologized to the cashier. And then the choice she made afterward, not to spend the opportunity on herself, but to turn it into something that helped many others. Steven smiled slightly, because that decision revealed something powerful. Kindness doesn't depend on wealth, it depends on heart. Inside the community center, the young mother finished stacking the last few boxes and wiped her hands on a small towel. Her daughter ran over holding a sticker one of the volunteers had given her. "Look what I got," she said proudly. "That's a nice reward," the mother laughed. Just then, the center manager walked over. "Thank you both for helping today," she said warmly. "We couldn't have done this without you." The mother shook her head. "You would have managed," she replied. But the manager smiled knowingly. "Maybe," she said, "but today turned out better than usual." The little girl looked around the now quiet room. "Did everyone get food?" she asked. "Yes," the manager said gently. "And because of what you both helped start yesterday, many more families will get help in the future too." The mother tilted her head slightly. "What do you mean?" she asked. The manager paused for a moment. She remembered Steven's request to keep the donation quiet. So instead of explaining the full story, she simply said, "Sometimes one good decision creates opportunities that keep growing." The mother thought about that for a moment. Then she smiled softly. "I guess kindness works like that," she said. Outside, Steven finally opened the car door and sat down. Before starting the engine, he took one last look at the building through the windshield. He didn't need recognition. He didn't need anyone to know what he had done, because the real reward had already happened. He had witnessed something rare, a person who had been given help and chose to multiply it. He started the engine, and the car pulled slowly away from the curb. Back inside the center, the volunteers finished the last of the cleaning. The young mother picked up her bag and held her daughter's hand. "Ready to go home?" she asked. The little girl nodded. "But Mom," she said as they walked toward the door, "that man from the store, he was really nice." Her mother smiled. "Yes," she replied. "He was." The girl looked up curiously. "Do you think we'll see him again?" The mother thought for a moment before answering. "Maybe," she said. "But even if we don't, what he did yesterday helped a lot of people." They stepped outside into the warm afternoon sunlight. Life continued as normal. Cars passed by. People walked down the sidewalk. No one around them knew the story that had unfolded over the past 24 hours. But the lesson remained clear. True, generosity isn't about how much someone gives. It's about what people choose to do with the kindness they receive. One quiet moment in a supermarket line had turned into food for dozens of families, and a small act of trust had revealed the incredible power of compassion, because sometimes the most meaningful changes in the world begin with something very simple. One person choosing to help another, and another choosing to pass that kindness forward. So now the real question is this. If someone trusted you with an opportunity to help others, what would you choose to do? Share your thoughts in the comments, like if you believe kindness still matters in today's world. And share this story with someone who believes that even small acts of generosity can create something truly powerful.